Welcome to lecture number 2, where we talk about the most important training variables to understand for understanding training methods. Remember in the previous one I said training methods are really about management and manipulation of certain training variables. So what are we going to cover in this lecture? What are the most important training variables? Number 1, defining the most important training variables, and then we look at a practical application. Let's get started. So what are the most important training variables in the context of training methods? Before we get started, what is a training variable in the first place? I hooked up a video in the bonus section you can check out that goes into detail what training variables are. But let's get started. So, program design variables, also known as training variables, are important factors that influence training adaptation. That's from the NSCA Strength and Conditioning Manual for high school coaches. Also, if we look at Bomper and Busicelli, periodization training for sports, to create successful training programs, coaches and athletes manipulate several training variables. So training variables are important. Most commonly when we talk about training variables, we talk about reps, sets and intensity. But let's get back to the question because we want to talk about training methods and the most important variables for training methods. In the previous lecture, we talked about the 4 training methods, the manipulation and management of intensity, volume, density and duration which is the lifeblood for training methods. So, training variables, we will talk about intensity, volume, duration, and density. You could argue, should we talk about frequency? We will talk about frequency, but then I will also show you why it's not one of the most important variables for training methods. So, defining the most important training variables in the context of training methods. Training intensity. What is training intensity? So intensity is the measurable amount of a property, such as force, brightness, or a magnetic field, from the Oxford Dictionary. So now you ask, what the heck is going on? We want to talk about training, but stay with me. We'll do that in a minute when we talk about intensity measures for strength, speed, and endurance. So takeaway, intensity is the measurable amount of a property, in our case, strength, speed, and endurance. Training volume. What is training volume? Volume refers to the amount of exercise performed over a period of time, from Brett Schoenfeld in his book Science and Development of Hypertrophy. Volume is often expressed as the number of repetitions completed in a resistance training bout. Most often sets multiplied by reps. So, takeaway, volume is the amount of exercise performed, most often sets multiplied by reps. What is training duration? Duration of training. The duration of training is a quantitative component referring to the length in time of a training bout or a training session. Let's dissect it. Length of time, either a training bout or a training session. But, big but, there is the session duration and the rep duration or repetition duration. And in the context of training variables for training methods, the rep duration is a bit more important. We'll get into that over the course of these lectures. But what is a rep duration in the first place? So if we look at a strength training, and this could be a cadence, called cadence for strength training, that could be a 3-second eccentric, 1 second in the bottom position, 1 second for the ascent, and 1 second in the top position. Yeah, so then the rep duration for this example, for this cadence, could be 6 seconds. So how does it look? Imagine a bench press. You start with the exercise, arms extended, bar in your hand. You lower it in 3 seconds. You hold it on your chest for 1 second. You push it up in 1 second and you hold the end position for another second. So that could be a rep duration for the bench press of 6 seconds. Long story made short, rep duration, the length in time of a training bout or repetition. training density. What is training density? Density of training can be thought of as a relationship expressed in units of time between working and recovery phases of training, from bumper and half. So, relationship between working and recovery. The greater the density of training, the shorter the recovery time between working phases. Shameless plug here from my strength training secret course. This is a graphical representation how density could look. So a low density at the bottom, across time, first set, rest, second set, rest, third set, and higher density at the top. So the training bouts, the sets, are closer to each other with less rest in between. A question that often occurs: density versus frequency, what's the difference? Not too difficult. Here from Stone and Sands, Principles and Practice of Resistance Training. Density refers to the amount of training that is packed into a given time period. Frequency simply refers to the number of training sessions. So for example, 2 days is denser training dosage than once a day. So density is the relationship between work and recovery. And the keyword here is work to rest ratio. And we'll get into the work to rest ratio over the next lectures. Training frequency, we just said, what is training frequency? Training frequency refers to the number of training sessions. So number of training sessions, here we have it. And then that could be daily, weekly, or monthly. So the takeaway: training frequency, the number of training sessions. Simple. So why did I put training frequency in brackets? And why did I say it's not necessarily one of the most important training variables? Because it does not acutely influence the training method. Chronically, over long term, yes, but acutely not. So for the management of training variables, and we talk about the continuous method, the interval method, and the repetition method, training frequency is not one of the acute training variables. Practical application, talking about training variables in the context of training methods. I already outlined when we talked about intensity that there are strength efforts, speed efforts, and endurance efforts. So the question is, why only strength, speed, and endurance? Essentially, they are the most fundamental biomotor abilities. Bold statement. I know that people will say, there's much more. Anyway, I would like to refer to that model of Bomper and Busicelli, where they look at strength, speed, and endurance. And then every sport, or every sporting action, if you want to be really precise, can be then put onto this chart. So for example, this is something that is dominant in strength, and that is something that is dominant in endurance, dominant in speed, but then we also have some mixed variations. Some speed requirements as well as endurance requirements, not so many strength requirements. So here we have it, speed requirements, some strength requirements, not so many endurance requirements. So the next question is, what about flexibility and coordination or technique? Again, the primary biomotor abilities. Flexibility is not a primary biomotor ability, but anyway, there are also certain methods to train flexibility. Also here, there are only 4 methods. If you understand them, then any training method to improve or maintain flexibility can be categorized in one of these 4 methods. And for the technique training, there is a world of philosophies out there. One of that is there are different ways to train technique, but you have the whole part, whole practice, you have the whole practice and the part practice and combinations. So if you want to go into detail on that, we can also use the model of Verkhoshansky and Sif, where they look at the 5 S of fitness: strength, speed, stamina, stretching, and suppleness. But back to the topic, we want to talk about training variables. and the practical application when it comes to training methods. So training intensity. If we look at strength efforts, training intensity can be expressed as percentage of the maximum strength. It could also be expressed as RM loads. What is RM loads? Repetition maximum loads. It can also be expressed as the magnitude of impulse in a given exercise or the impulse quality of an exercise. If we look at speed, how can intensity be expressed? Percent, excuse me for that. So speed efforts, percent based on the highest speed in a given exercise. Yeah, so how could that look? Let's make it simple. We can sprint 100 meters in 10 seconds if we are really fast. So that is our 100%. And then we could make calculations. What is our 95%, 90%, and so on and so on. Velocity in meters per second is another one. Impulse quality and movement frequency in a given time. How many movements can you do in 4 seconds, 6 seconds, whatsoever. Intensity when it comes to endurance. Velocity, meters per second, kilometers per minute, or kilometers per hour. Heart rate, beats per minute in a given exercise or given distance or time. Then we have the percentage of given maximum performance. We look into that. And then also we can look at power output or percent of the maximum O2 uptake. Training volume. Training volume strength refers to the number of repetitions of a given exercise, the volume load, reps multiplied by sets multiplied by intensity, or the total load, some people call it tonnage, is then the reps multiplied by the sets multiplied by the weight lifted. Speed volume. How can we quantify volume for speed efforts? The total distance or the number of repetitions in a given exercise or exercise category. Endurance. How to quantify distance, the repetitions of sets of a given exercise in a training session. Total training duration in minutes or hours, or training duration, hours per week, training sessions per week. Training duration. We talked about that. For the strength duration, I showed you an example of cadence, 3 seconds, 1 second, 1 second, 1 second. So that is a rep duration of 6 seconds, also called cadence. Speed. Time to completion of a given distance or time to completion of a given number of repetitions. Yeah? And then endurance, time to completion of a given distance. So these are the quantifiables for strength, speed, and endurance. Training density. For strength efforts, the work to rest ratio and the rest between repetitions and sets. Between repetitions called intra-serial rest or intra-set rest, and between the sets, inter-serial rest or inter-set rest. Speed efforts, reps between distances, repetitions and sets, or also the work to rest ratio. And endurance efforts, rest between distances, reps and sets, or the work to rest ratio. What did we cover in this lecture? We talk about the most important variables for training methods, the manipulation and management of training methods, which we'll get into in the next lecture. Intensity, volume, density, and duration. And then I gave you a definition of those, and we looked at the practical application, how that unfolds for strength, speed, and endurance. And what I just showed you, the screenshots, you can find them right here. If you go to the website and you sign up, you get the videos, audio, slides, transcript downloadables. So you get the list. Best thing is it's for free. And for now, I see you in the next lecture where we talk about the continuous training method. And if you've missed the previous one, what are training methods, you can also find it right here.